Well, why are we back on stems? We're not really on stems. I just thought I would do a recording over my lemon myrtle story. Some of you might not know, but I have a lemon myrtle story and it does fit in with stem propagation. So, and you remember from our stem lesson that propagation was one of the things that we needed stems for, and that it of course is asexual. And reproduction that's a very efficient way for us to assist reproduction. Lemon myrtle happens to be a crop that has an extremely poor seed viability, and so stem propagation is pretty much the only way for reproduction to occur. So this is the beginning. This is Limpinwood in northern New South Wales, and at the time I was liaised with someone who had obviously a certified organic Backhausia citriodora farm. And as you can see, it's a hedge crop. So it actually yields far more essential oil when it is cut as a hedge. So pretty much like tea. So Camellia sinensis, same sort of thing. So this particular farmer was at the time already exporting lemon myrtle spice, which is what it's called when it's finely ground, to Malaysia, and suggested to, believe it or not, the chairman of AirAsia to start a lemon myrtle plantation in Malaysia. Why? Because basically lemon myrtle and a lot of our native crops are not well supported here in Australia. This was a little one-person farm. There is no support. Getting to the point of bankruptcy is very common in some of these small Australian native crop farms. So this is what it looks like pretty much obviously before harvest. And this is what we decided to do. So because it had never been done before, how do you transport cuttings from one country to another where the flight takes 9 hours and transit time is at least 12? So we decided to take plenty of cuttings, as you can see by all the buckets, and then it was part of my responsibility, I guess, to work out, okay, how are we going to transport them? And I'll get to that in a little bit. So we actually did tri and quadruple nodal cuttings. So you remember from your stems lesson that the node is your point of proliferation. So we had lots and lots of buckets of cuttings, yes, and this is 4 a.m. in the morning. So if you look at, yes, we had to poison it. Why did we have to poison it? So the Australian Quarantine Authority, which is based on the Gold Coast, and this was in northern New South Wales, remember, has a requirement that anything that gets exported from Australia needs to be drowned in these two. So you can see the little bundles of lemon myrtles in the background, and we'd already done some cutting. So you'll see that we had to cut some of the leaf surface area off, and this prevents, of course, transpiration. It prevents loss of water, loss of nutrients, as you remember from when we did our circulatory system in roots and of course stems. So here they are in the bath and lots of bundles. I didn't touch these, so this was not something I wanted to do, but it smells. And of course then all of these bundles had to be wrapped up, and I'll just go to the next slide. No, I'll go back to that one, sorry. Yeah, they had to be wrapped up in tissue paper. We actually did it in butcher's paper, a lot of butcher's paper, and then all of the bundles went into styrofoam boxes. Now you've got to remember, we didn't know what we were doing. This was a trial. So was it going to work? Well, we get to here. This quarantine nursery is on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur, and the land actually belongs to the chairman of AirAsia's wife. She happily, or not so happily actually, let us or let the organisation build a quarantine nursery. So the cuttings in their styrofoam boxes were transported under escort, under guard, to the quarantine nursery. Nothing was allowed to be unwrapped until it was inside the nursery. So Malaysia is actually quite strict on all of this sort of thing. All right, so now this bunch here looks nice and healthy, and because we were doing a trial, we actually wanted to see if some of the myrtle would do well without cutting back the leaf surface, and some obviously where we did cut back the leaf surface. And initially when we unpacked them, this is what some of them looked like. So a pretty nice healthy bunch where we had not cut the leaf surface back. So this is pretty much the beginning. Of course, initially we're like, okay, let's just put them all in buckets. And this process happened a number of times, so not just once. This is the first shipment, which would have been in 2009. And so there were incremental shippings between then and 2012. And of course, each time you learn more, and you'll see what we learned in a moment. So there's lots of nice bundles of 4 and 5 and even 6 nodal cuttings in bundles of 25, I think we did. So the other issue, or one of the many issues, as you can see, it's very wet there. Now Malaysians love hosing. They love everything wet. It's one of their things. So that's fine. But of course, you end up starting to water too much. And first of all, but the first problem even before that was to source seedling trays, potting mix, the vermiculite and so on. Now that I had nothing to do with that. That was not one of my tasks, fortunately. I was just along for the ride. But as you can see, these are our first cuttings, and you'll be able to see when I go in closer, they're different type of nodal cuttings. So I'll just go to the next slide. You can see here, there's one of the little girls in the background. So everyone has to wear gumboots, of course, and we have the sanitation tray that you stand in, which was embedded into the concrete with bleach. So believe it or not, bleach is the certified organic approved cleaning agent and disinfectant. So those girls were responsible. Obviously, we were starting to teach them how to propagate cuttings, how to actually do it all without damaging them. And believe it or not, they spoke no English. So if you have a look at these and you go in nice and close, you can see there's variations. Some we've got trinodes, so we've got trinodal cuttings, and we'll have some binodal cuttings, okay? So they'll vary. Because it's a trial, we wanted to see what's going to work because we had no idea. So if you look at this, you can see, yes, there's a binodal cutting. So you have 1 and 2 nodes. But you also see things are very, very wet and starting to rot, okay? So the loss initially was humongous. It was gigantic. It was some incredible amount. And that's just basically from mismanagement. This farm was quite away from where we lived, so to actually monitor the staff is not possible, as well as my partner at the time managing the running of everything was a lot of work. So if we go to this slide now, this is different damage. This is actually freezer burn from the cargo hold. So we lost most of the cuttings from this first consignment. I would say probably 85% were lost. And when you look at that, it's just so disheartening. you think, oh my goodness me, keep going. But of course, he was very determined, kept going. And these here, again, so I've put at the top of the slide, how many nodes can you see? These are single node cuttings. Okay, so we didn't find that they worked particularly well. Even if you ask somebody now here in Australia who's trying to propagate lemon myrtle, they will say they don't know. It's extremely difficult to grow. So here's a lovely little photo of the girls. And of course, how to use Stanley knives, how to strike cuttings, how to cut the leaves, that all has to be demonstrated, and it happens with a lot of giggling. That water solution actually has a very small amount of bleach in it. That's perfectly safe. So this is what actually happened, and we trialed, and this is whether it works, whether it doesn't work. The binodal cutting on the left worked particularly nicely. The one in the middle was one of my experimental tip cuttings where we did not cut the leaf surface off. But see, even the one on the right that failed, 4 months. It'll take 4 months to get to this size if you're lucky. So they were lucky. And then this is the outdoor hardening off area. So, this all takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of effort, and, you just go, wow, did we want to do that? The advantage of doing this is that now this is the only nursery, I think, worldwide that was the only farm that started that was free of lemon myrtle rust. Lemon myrtle rust is a bright fluo orange fungus that infects the young leaves of the myrtaceae, and it hit the northern New South Wales farm pretty much just before or just after the last consignment in 2012 was shipped to Malaysia. Then Malaysia had a ban. Anything within a certain radius of an infected site, they would not let in. So that was extremely fortunate that the myrtle rust did not get here, because to use anything and maintain and try and keep an organic certification is very difficult here in Australia now with myrtle rust. So this is even further again, and they're starting to look quite nice despite all that hosing. And they can tolerate a fair bit of water, but not drowning. But once they get to this size, failure is pretty low. It's pretty successful by the time they get to this size. This is, and if you're interested in all of this sort of thing, this is actually a government-run essential oil distillation site, which is also part of some of the land that the organisation were able to lease very, very cheaply from the Malaysian government to also plant more trees. So the idea is that there's lots of little plantations with lots of smallholder farmers supported to grow myrtle. So this pile in the front here, that's actually patchouli. Most of the oil that gets distilled here is patchouli. Believe it or not, lemon myrtle, the essential oil use is minor. It is the smallest component of the plant that is used. Lemon myrtle is actually used mainly as a dried herb or as a spice. So this is the first orchard, which used to be an abandoned rice paddy, after 18 months. So one of the great things with the equator, it loves the climate. So this is the equivalent of 3 years growth here in Australia. So it's quite fantastic. This is still on that same farm, and it's pretty much Yes, a drying facility. And unfortunately, one of the issues here was sourcing fans big enough, sourcing a heater, because one of the first stages of leaf drying is they actually get warmed slightly. So the important thing with leaf drying is that you actually wilt first. And I have to say, this lemon myrtle is still the greenest and the best and the most beautiful I have ever seen. Compares out of sight to any of the processors here in Australia. That's one of my photos from one of my teas. So that's actually what it looks like once it's finished. Okay, I hope it was an interesting journey, and the issues that revolve around something like this are incredible to observe. One of the big benefits for my former partner who started this was that his brother is a tissue culture scientist, and believe it or not, he has cracked the DNA code for cultivating sterile Bacchausia citriodora in a petri dish. So they've also started a plantation with those plants. Look slightly different, a little bit thinner, scragglier leaves, that sort of thing, but sterile. So that means absolutely no fungus at all, and perfectly safe if they wanted to export the plants to another country, for example. Okay, I will add my traditional lemon myrtle biscuit recipe to this PowerPoint, and you might, you think about what else you want to do with it. Okay.